I pledge allegiance to the Movie Reviewers 100 of the United Videos of YouTube, and to the website for which it uploads one film fan community under Orson Welles with editing and CGI for all. Amen. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott, also known as CINERAM, and I am one of 7 guys here on this collaboration channel, 3 of whom are celebrating Independence Day today here in the States. That doesn't mean we're watching Independence Day, we're just celebrating it. Our theme this week is a sad one, because James Gandolfini only passed away just last week. We decided to take the theme that we were planning on doing with him and move it up, so I'm wrapping up that week today. We've had some good videos so far, and my video is going to be on an unusual selection in his filmography. It's called Where the Wild Things Are. I actually was at a theater just a couple nights ago, and one of those marketing guys took me aside and said, "Hey, do you want to see a new trailer?" And it turned out to be the one, a trailer for the new James Gandolfini movie, which hasn't even been released to the web yet. It's called Enough Said, I think. It's a comedy. It has Julie Louis-Dreyfus and Catherine Keener in it. It looks pretty good, and Gandolfini is like the leading guy in that one. But like many of you, I first discovered this actor when I saw True Romance. In True Romance, he had a very, very memorable part as one of Christopher Walken's crew, and he has a big fight scene with Patricia Arquette, of course. And I've seen him in a bunch of movies since then. And one thing that strikes me about Gandolfini is that he was one of those guys who possessed the 2 most important qualities of any actor in film. There are 2 very important qualities. One is that they be charismatic, the kind of guy that you can't stop watching and listening to, and 2, a guy who acts with authenticity. I mean, anyone could memorize some dialogue and stand in front of a camera and repeat it, okay, but acting requires that you sort of get in touch with whatever the emotion of the moment is, and good actors can do that, and Gandolfini was one of those guys who could do that, who always seemed genuine and authentic, whatever moment he was playing, and the kind of person, you know, who you couldn't stop watching. You know, he's this larger than life guy. He has this really kind of the voice is just, everything about him just is pretty memorable. So yeah, he's been a favorite actor of mine for quite some time. So Where the Wild Things Are is kind of an unusual project for you know, your standard children's movie, in that it's not really a children's movie at all, although it's based on a children's book, which is kind of a funny coincidence because we just did a theme last week on movies that are based on children's books. So I easily could have done this movie for that week. But the picture is directed by Spike Jonze, who of course has directed some pretty extraordinary, unusual movies. He's got a film coming out probably later this year in which Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with the female voice on his cell phone's operating system, like Siri. Only this one's voiced by Scarlett Johansson. The movie's called Her. He's also, of course, directed a lot of very famous music videos, and he directed the feature films Adaptation and Being John Malkovich. All of which I like. Actually, Adaptation I don't like quite as much as the other ones, but both Being John Malkovich and Where the Wild Things Are made my list of top movies of the year. He also co-wrote the script with David Eggers. David Eggers is kind of an unusual guy. He doesn't have a lot of film credits. Some of his work has been adapted and is being adapted for the screen, but this is like probably the only time that he's actually co-written a script. He's probably best known for his nonfiction book, Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. So again, it's just very unusual that he would work on a project like this. as is Maurice Sendak, the guy who wrote the book. The book is very, very short and only contains, I think maybe, like less than 20 episodes, basically 20 spreads on the page of illustrations and narration. The story is very, very simple. A kid basically runs off to this mythical land with these big beasts and becomes their king and orders them around, and then returns home. And it all sort of happens in a very, very short span of time. The film plays around with this a little bit. The film basically has him having, tiffs with his sister and with his mother, who's played by Catherine Keener, and the boy is played by Max Records, by the way. His character's name is Max as well. And he has basically like a wolf costume. It's basically just a white costume with ears on top and whiskers out the side. And he sort of runs riot, and he's a troublemaker, and he doesn't get along with people and things like that. He's just sort of antisocial, but he feels lonely. His dad isn't around anymore. His parents have gotten divorced, and so he's looking for escape into that fantasy world. So after Max has a particularly bad fight with his mom, he runs off in the night, and then we see him boarding a boat that's sitting by the water, basically. A little sailboat, which he then takes out in the water and sails for like a day and a night, and finally arrives on this island where he encounters all the creatures that you see in the book. Now, at this point, obviously, none of this is actually happening realistically, and it made me think at this point, what category does this movie really belong to? Does it belong to children's movies, or is it a fantasy film, or is it actually just a drama, just a plain old regular drama that takes place largely in a kid's imagination? I think that's probably the best category for it. The video stores that I visit that rent out this movie, one of them has it in sci-fi fantasy, and the other has it in kids' movies, and it really doesn't belong in either of those. When I went to see this movie in the theater, there were a bunch of families there with their little kids. And as the movie went on, I thought, oh, this is a mistake. This is not a movie for kids. It might feature a little kid talking with creatures, and it might be rated PG, which is a very mild rating and is suitable for a lot of... But this isn't a really movie for kids. And the reason for that is because of how the story is set up. In a typical movie, you've got a main character, and they find themselves in a certain situation, and there's something that they have to accomplish by the end of the picture. And sometimes they succeed, and sometimes they don't succeed, but there's sort of a definitive ending to that quest, whatever it is, that objective, and then the movie's over. And this movie doesn't have that. So a lot of the kids around me were getting really restless. They didn't understand what was going on here. This is not like the typical kids movie. So I felt kind of bad for the parents, because they might have felt duped into thinking this was actually a movie that was good for kids to see, and it really isn't at all. When Max encounters the creatures on this island, basically, they're all sort of having like a tantrum. The most important of the creature characters is the one that's voiced by James Gandolfini. His name is Carol, and he's basically like having fun ripping apart the houses. The houses are really interesting. They correlate with something that's in Max's room. I was actually, in the early scenes, looking for stuffed animals that resembled the creatures from the main part of the movie in Max's room, but there aren't any. They're just standard stuffed animals. But he's got basically a kind of a sphere that's made out of twigs with a hole in the middle of it, and most of these structures in the fantasy world actually resemble that. Also, the boat that he rides on, he's got a little miniature sailboat with little sails on it in his room that he plays around with in one of the early scenes. So when he gets there, he sort of makes a grand entrance. He runs into the midst of them, and he imitates Carol. He picks up sticks and starts smashing things. And Carol looks at the little kid and goes, "Hey, man, this guy's all right. I like this guy. We should, he should be one of our family here. All these creatures are hanging around going, well, what is he? He's just a little thing, with white fur. They don't really think of him as a kid. They think of him as an unusual creature that they've never seen before. These big lumbering guys. If you think of like Big Bird, basically, the person in the costume basically walks in it, but has this thing sticking up high as the head. And the creatures all have, sort of, I guess, people off camera manipulating like the heads or whatever. But the faces are all done with CGI. It was sort of the problem that they had with this movie during production, is that when Spike Jonze showed an early cut of the movie, none of the CGI had been done yet. So the faces are all frozen in place. They didn't move at all. And the executives who had funded the movie and were going to distribute were like, well, what the heck is this? You know, there's hardly any plot in this movie, you know, and the faces don't move. And so the movie was supposed to come out, I think, like, they originally thought it would come out in the fall of 2008 or something like that, but it got delayed an entire year so they could, you know, work on it. And Spike Jonze, the director, was talking about how, you know, this isn't a standard kids movie, and that, you know, I don't try and emotionally manipulate the audience to a certain end. I just present the story as it is and let people have whatever reaction they're going to have. And this is not the kind of way that they usually make kids movies. So it was a confusing time, and I'm sure a lot of people were confused when they saw the movie. But it's more of a grown-up movie about kids rather than a movie about kids for kids. It's certainly not for kids. So when Max makes his entrance, he really makes an impression on everyone, and he starts telling tall tales about how he conquered a whole village of Vikings. And so the creatures, the whole network of creatures there, they decide to make him their king. And he immediately says, okay, let the wild rumpus begin, which is a line from the book, I think, and they all go hog wild, running around all over the place, smashing things, howling, you know, into the sky, and then sleeping on a big pile and going, man, this kid is great. I'm so glad we made him our king, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, with a situation like this, with kids, a lot of the times the emotions will shift rapidly, and the smallest things, that people will get sensitive about the smallest things in a moment, and they'll start arguing and being pissed at each other, things like that, and it oftentimes seems to happen without reason, at least not to an outside observer. And this is another reason why this really isn't a good movie for kids, is because, you know, there isn't a logical path necessarily to the feelings that everyone's having. They get angry, and then, I don't know, something happens, they're okay again. Max says, let's build a big project, let's do a big fort, let's build this giant structure, and they're like really excited about that, but then after a while they get angry with each other again, and frustrated, and jealous, and what have you. A lot of the other characters, I'm not really familiar with who does the voices of them. I read the list of people at the end of the credits, but most of them, their voices I didn't recognize. Catherine O'Hara, I know who she is playing. And also Lauren Ambrose from 6 Feet Under. She plays a character named KW. I sort of worked that out by process of elimination. But really, Gandolfini is the one guy who I really recognize clearly. So yeah, there isn't a conventional story, and there's no real conventional ending either, because there is no particular objective that needs to be achieved there. So yeah, it's an unusual project, to be sure, very, very unusual. I read that although the actors didn't actually wear the suits, they did actually spend a lot of time rehearsing with Max Records, the kid actor. Basically, they just had a big gymnasium that they worked in. And they held all these foam rubber props, and they just sort of acted out the entire storyline, and you know, in rehearsal. And so that's how they worked out what would happen. And then they actually went on location, filmed the scenes with the guys wearing these big, heavy suits that would later be animated. Very, very unusual way to make a movie, but really good, if that's the kind of thing that you're into. Some people wouldn't like this movie very much at all, but I did. It was one of my favorite movies that came out in 2009. I think it was number 3, right under Wendy and Lucy and Coraline, which is an actual kids movie. Coraline's an actual kids movie. And you know, Gandolfini, of course, you know, he's always going to be someone who's very, very distinctive, and a guy that you just like can't help notice. And it's a real shame that he's gone. I mean, he's 51 when he died, which means that 20 years ago, when True Romance came out, he was only 31, which is crazy, really, really crazy. So yeah, there's still a bunch of movies that he's been in that I haven't seen, and there's a couple that have yet to come out, but I'll be looking into checking those out when I can. So that is our theme this week. Mr. Gandolfini, rest in peace. You will be very much missed. Thanks to all the guys for making Gandolfini videos this week. If you haven't seen them, check them out. We've got a review of Zero Dark Thirty, a review of The Man Who Wasn't There. Al did a review on The Sopranos, of course, which is the TV series that he was the star of for a bunch of years. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with a new theme starting tomorrow. And take it easy, everyone, and happy Independence Day to those of you in the States who are celebrating.